All right, hello everyone. Welcome back to Dan's Astrology. Today is the 4th of August, and my topic for today is going to be about the upcoming full moon in Aquarius coming up on the 9th of this month, and it will be defined by the following characteristics, namely that prior to this full moon, we're going to have Mars ingress into Libra, and once Mars is in Libra, Mars will be making trine aspects to Pluto in Aquarius and Uranus in Gemini, creating a grand trine, and it will also be opposing Saturn and Neptune in Aries, forming a kite aspect. This was the topic of the last video I did, and so maybe there's a bit of repetition in the sense that these aspects will be coloring the full moon. The full moon is going to be in Aquarius, where it is ruled by Aquarius. Traditionally, is ruled by the planet Saturn, and this traditional ruler Saturn will be in this opposition to Mars in Libra, and because of this, I think that there's a lot of high pressure, dramatic situations in the world right now, and it'll be interesting to watch this upcoming full moon because I think there's a sort of feeling like maybe we are waiting for the other shoe to drop, right? Maybe we're expecting something's going to develop, something's going to happen around this, and in light of this, I'm thinking more in this video. I'm thinking more about various things happening in terms of current events, and I have to admit that to some extent, I think the whole Epstein controversy is part of this, but as what I'm doing with this astrology channel is that I have spent some time listening to some podcasts of people who've been researching this stuff, but I don't really think it's my job to go over all of that, but I may bring some of it up. But I think if you want to there's something about I haven't been looking at specific charts for the specific people involved, or I haven't been taking a astrology approach to this problem. However, what I think is interesting, if you pay attention to what astrology is supposed to represent in terms of an underlying archetype or an underlying pattern that's behind that, and that this archetype could be playing out in any number of different ways, and that you can see that, and that one particular controversy or drama is just one manifestation of the underlying archetype. And if that archetype in question, right now we're talking about a full moon in Aquarius, we're talking about Saturn as the ruler, and I already mentioned before Saturn in Aries, that the Aries has to do with youth, and the winter signs such as Aquarius and Capricorn are Saturn ruled, and they have to do more with old age and elderliness, and so there is this conflict, or that element to it being highlighted by the astrology, as well as I think that there's something about I don't know, like the way that also Donald Trump is kind of like a bumbling idiot in some way, in that in some way it is what he's trying to do in terms of reordering the paradigm of like free market capitalism, is like a very ambitious thing, and most people would think that this would be way too complicated for any one man to be able to comprehend, to be able all the different complexities and how to do it. But it's kind of interesting in a way that if you just treat all the complex problems of the world as if you're a bumbling idiot and make a big mess out of it, then you can do all sorts of things that people would think would be impossible because they would expect that you would approach it at least with some basic level of competency. And so there's this kind of like, this is what kind of makes it bizarre, is that there's a certain kind of like Dunning-Kruger effect where it's like like the world is your oyster if you're willing to be a complete idiot about it. Basically, like you can do whatever you want if you have no problem with making a complete buffoon out of yourself and being completely impervious to that, right? Like most normal people wouldn't do. So it was kind of, there's a certain singular character of Trump's ability to do all these things that most normal people wouldn't be able to do, right? And this seeming freedom that gives him, right, of just being an idiot about it, right? But I think there's certain things around this as well, which the recent threats of nuclear war and stuff like that. I think that this could be kind of like an effort to wag the dog away from the controversy that he can't bury, and that there's apparently this recent threat of nuclear war with Russia was not even, he was responding to somebody who's not even currently employed by the government, who is just trolling on Twitter. He was a guy who was a former was it prime minister or president? I don't know. A former government official was talking some shit on Twitter, and this is enough to send some nuclear subs over to get everybody's blood pressure up, to get everybody all stressed out and stuff like that. But I think there's there's other things going on in the news that if we shift focus a little bit here and we get back to the fact that Aquarius and also the air signs in general are often associated with technology and media, information, communications, and things like that. And there's certain other developments going on where Trump just recently fired the person who was reporting to him the statistics for job creation, and it's sort of like a shoot. You know, this is also interesting as Mercury retrograde is in this opposition to Pluto. There's this shooting the messenger and there's this kind of, some people are thinking that this is a certain line to cross because there's a certain like moving away from being totally like what the reality you live in and what the numbers are, what the data is, what the actual statistics about what's going on in the economy. It's like, you know, it would be really limiting if you actually had to take those numbers into consideration, or that you actually had to make your decisions have some bearing on the real world consequences of your actions. But if you can just shoot the messenger and do whatever you want, there's a whole realm of options available to you that otherwise wouldn't be available, right? But there's this kind of funny thing where it's like going both ways in at the same time as there's all this issue of like firing the person who's telling you what the numbers are because you don't like the numbers. But then at the same time, if you look at what's happening in the UK, there's a lot of controversy right now about the UK creating laws around mandatory age verification. And the thing that was interesting is that the government that the UK elected is a liberal centrist government. They're not like, it seems like a sort of heavy-handed kind of authoritarian kind of law. But to compare that to, I'm a Canadian, in Canadian politics, it was actually, for some reason, I don't know why people weren't talking about this in terms of Canada, but our Conservative Party were the ones who wanted to introduce the same kind of laws that the UK are doing here in Canada to make the same kinds of mandatory logins and stuff like this. And part of the concern around this, of course, is things like if stuff gets hacked, then that means that your identity is that much more able to be stolen because you have. It's not just like going, if you went to a bar or a nightclub, or if you bought some alcohol at a liquor store, you could just show your ID. But in order to do it online, they usually need a lot more than just flashing an ID to a bouncer. It's like they're gonna need your like banking information. They're gonna need your address. They're gonna need your telephone. They're gonna need your passport. Or it's like you got your whole, like, it's as if you're taking out a mortgage or something just to use the internet. And then if people can completely exploit, I don't know. There's the vulnerabilities of that. There's also kind of funny. It's some of the more conspiracy-minded people may suspect that the elites are using astrology to coordinate all this stuff, but I don't think they would. I think if they were really that serious about astrology, they wouldn't choose to do this while Mercury's retrograde. It just doesn't seem like a great time to roll out all these new laws and rules and legislations. But there's also, at the same time, not just the UK doing this, but YouTube, this platform that I'm on right now, or that I'm uploading this video to anyways, the YouTube is also introducing similar laws around this, which are all about age verification and identity verification. And part of the problem around this is that apparently YouTube was never intended for people below the age of, I don't know, for children, basically, right? They have, whenever you upload something to YouTube, there's a little box that you have to check. Is this video intended for children? Yes or no? And there's some kind of way that the algorithm works where they want to keep more adult content separate from stuff that's intended for children or something like this. But there's also this kind of thing that, like, if you have to also understand that, like, the more that you are registered or that you are logged in, like, what does it mean to log into something? To log in means like a log book, or like where you are keeping a log of everything that you've watched, all your history, and all of this in. When you combine, so you combine this with your demographic information to say this is your age, this is your, this is your credit score, this is your employment history, this is your education, this is your health you have all this information, and then you combine that with we can collect all this data about what you spend time watching, what your consumer habits are, all this kind of stuff, and then there's this huge data economy around this where anybody from any private organization can just buy this data and do what they want with it. And, this could be a double-edged sword, right? If we bring this back to the problem of the Epstein controversy, apparently the cell phone records of the GPS data of everyone who's ever been to Epstein Island is available to be purchased online through private data brokers. And Wired Magazine did a story on this. And that, like, so they can see, but they have all these cell phone numbers, and they can track exactly who's been going to Epstein Island, how long they've been spending time on there, like where they go when they come back. But they can't, they can only do that within the America. They can't see anybody who's been going to Europe or the UK because of the data privacy laws or whatever, right? And so it's kind of interesting because there's certain things like there's a simultaneous thing happening where there's a certain sense of alarmism over the predation on young people, especially with the controversy in Epstein that this could be a corrupt group of elites who are the cabal or whatever, right? And the other problem about this is that the simultaneous thing where there's all this concern about this topic, there's instead of holding the elites accountable, why don't we just have more data collection on everyday people, where what you are doing online is more and more tied to this verified, established identity from which you can create all this digital exhaust, which creating all this information from which they can people can profit off of, right? And the company, which has been apparently the one that has been making lots of money in the stock market, skyrocketing, and the biggest investor, whatever, is this Palantir, which is basically the one that is harvesting all this data for the sake of security purposes, to find out if you are, a terrorist or a revolutionary or an insurgent or, a separatist or whatever, right? Like, it's like, so you've got this kind of thing where, on one hand, obviously, there's no accountability for the elites, who are probably the ones who are above the law, who are apparently entitled to do whatever they want, who live in a different universe, who are apparently unbeholden to the moral standards that the rest of us are. But for the average Joe, what we're going to be experiencing is increasing sense of constant surveillance, constantly having everything you do online, or where your whereabouts of where you go, how, everything is going to be, more and more clamped down on the more you have these imperatives that everything has to be logged on, everything has to be accounted for. You're going to more and more data to feed this military. And keep in mind too that the internet itself was something that was invented, that came out of the military industrial complex. Most technology came out of that, right? The whole acceleration that happened because of World War II, and the whole acceleration of computers based in of coming out of the Cold War and all this kind of stuff. It's all interconnected. That they're basically so you can see how this is it's kind of concerning, right? Let me just look at my notes here if there's anything else. Yeah, and okay, in the midst of all this, obviously Epstein, there's some other astrologers have been doing things like looking at the astrology of the day Epstein, left the earth, right? Whether he was murdered or whether it was suicide or whatever it was. And now it's interesting to notice that his accomplice, Ghislaine Maxwell, has apparently made some kind of a deal, but has been moved from a high security prison to a minimum security prison. Apparently they had a very long interview with her, and now most people, I think, can read this as she's probably going to get whacked. She's probably been she's probably going to be murdered in prison, and so that whatever information that she has will go to the grave, and that the whole conspiracy will go on with so that could be one thing that could happen, or that's the most obvious read of the situation, right? What's also interesting, there's also just little things that I don't know if haven't noticed people talking about, but apparently Steve Bannon has 15 hours of interview footage with Epstein, that before Epstein died, Steve Bannon sat down to do a documentary on him and recorded a whole 15 hours talking to this guy about the whole problem, and it hasn't been released, right? And so there's that in the background, and then there's also this kind of as MAGA is kind of fracturing, it's going to be interesting to see what you think are there going to be, I don't know, I'm not really paying attention. I guess I'm only exposed to my filter bubble. I don't know what this looks like on the side of people who are actually involved in MAGA right now. It's also kind of, I don't know, there's all sorts of concerning things going on in the world in terms of political extremism. Maybe, I don't know, maybe if you play devil's advocate, maybe it's a good thing that we're going to have an increasingly authoritarian police state where you feel like you're being watched, that you have the eye on you at all times, and that everything you're doing is being logged and being studied and analyzed and being fed to these it's like, this is the moment that we're in. I think there's something about Pluto in Aquarius, the full moon in Aquarius, and and also this grand trine happening between all the air signs that kind of goes with this idea I've been playing with about the age of Aquarius, in that if you think about age of Aquarius being a kind of technological future age, right? That we are just being we've only been introduced to it, basically. And that it's still basically, or there's something about how some underlying thing that if you go back to the animes like Neon Genesis Evangelion and Serial Experiments Lane, this is another kind of dynamic in here about I don't know. There's a basic underlying archetype, anyways, between youth and adulthood, and the basic repression around. The thing is, basically, I don't want to spend too much time talking about this about my astrology channel, because at a basic level, it's just kind of gross and it's kind of disturbing, and it's like, I feel like we're having this all, it's like, it's also just, there's something obviously fascistic about it, in the fact that we are in some way like forced to deal with all this, and at the same time being the hypocrisy of it all, or that there's an unevenness of a very authoritarian regime, a very versus people who are very clearly above the law and who do whatever they want. And like that, if you are for the average person, it feels like we're living in a very constrained circumstances where we don't have a lot of options, that you're walking a very straight and narrow road of what a good person, and then anytime you veer off of what you should do, or whatever the ruling master elite class wants you to do, it's like, oh my God, they're like, they're trying to like, the algorithm is going to be saying like, why, so, you'll get, your algorithm will say like, why you're making the wrong choices in life, what to do if you're feeling lost, how to reorient your life to get on the good track. And meanwhile, it's like the people who are above this get to be complete monsters with no accountability. And for you, the smallest infraction is like the robot telling you like, oh, I think like, are you drinking enough water today? Have you been getting enough exercise? Like, did you know that this thing you're eating is going to get I think there is at least some element here where the invasiveness of this all could actually be helpful to play devil's advocate, in the sense, that you could have like a health condition, and maybe there's some sort of thing you could be doing to help your health condition that you're not aware of, and that this information apparatus structure knows better than you do how to support your health. And so that they're always like, you're going to be like, drink more water, get more exercise, use this sort of cream or supplement, or and it's all this kind of, so you can be a healthier, better person, and to be aligned with, and of course, but this is also just reinforcing your identity as a person who is dependent on this whole structure to tell you how you're supposed to make choices, how you're supposed to live your life, and that you can trust it because it's, you wear a Fitbit, right? You can be like, this thing knows me better than I know myself, because I don't know, how much my heart pressure goes up and down. I don't know what my body weight is. I don't know how many steps I get. So if I just like admit that I'm a human, I'm infallible, but a perfect machine that calculates all the numbers, if I just let this thing have all my information, and it might know all these things that I don't, and it will be able to tell me how to be a better person, right? And that I can just admit that I'm just kind of like a moron, and this thing knows better than me, and then it will calculate all the numbers, tell me what you want to do, and then while we are beholden to this, we get to just like stay glued to our TV sets watching the political development, where the elites, when they get told about how the economy is doing, they get to just fire the person who's telling them how the economy is doing, right? Like, it's like, if your Fitbit is telling you your blood pressure is too high, you can just like throw your Fitbit on the ground and smash it and go, like, fuck you, Fitbit, and it's like, because like, this is so there's this kind of like, these kinds of like two polarities here of being like, on one hand, just like being like, yeah, the techno structure will help me to improve myself and make me a better person because it knows more about me than I know about myself, and it's studying all the information that I give it, and it's feeding me back the perfect remedy for my own problem. But meanwhile, the people that are, if you get to rise up in rank and status, you get to be as much of a narcissistic asshole as you want, and it's only you're basically just kind of like a sucker for thinking that you have to do anything anybody tells you, whether it's grounded in a kind of mathematical certainty or not, right? Like the real Ubermensch, I guess you would say, doesn't care about the numbers. He doesn't he doesn't care what the odds are. He doesn't care about the he just does what the king gets to do what he wants without any sort of accountability, right? And this is kind of like, but there's something funny about this. What's interesting is that I saw a post on Facebook the other day where somebody was talking about like Lacan versus integral psychology. I don't know, this is just coming up to my mind now, but it's kind of interesting because they're making this argument of like, we shouldn't view all this stuff that's going on right now as regressive, right? That we're not, it's not, like the more we develop science and technology and have more ability to develop like a way to understand things in terms of a kind of a mathematical certainty of accounting of what's going on, and if we decide to just, in the face of the debacle of what the information that we are being communicated means to us, that we always have the option to just regress to the level of Genghis Khan barbarian, where if you tell the barbarian overlord something he doesn't like, he can off with the head, right? And that's not regressive at all. That's just the complexity. That's just the increasing complexity of human life, right? That's not a regression back to barbarism. That's just it's just the complexity of being a human, right? That you never know. One minute you could be like a highly advanced statistician or computer engineer. The next minute you could be fucking Mad Max, and that's just the glorious complexity of life. It's not regressive, right? I'm being sarcastic. I actually think that a lot of this has to do with I think that we really are just still working out the kinks between a technological. This is with the trine between the three air signs and the age of Aquarius dynamic with this full moon in Aquarius. I really do think that the part of the issue here is that the mythology we have created around technology and the age of reason, the age of enlightenment, is that it offers us the opportunity to be liberated from the old way of doing things. But that liberation is inherently individualistic, in that it's a kind of a new territory to pioneer into, right? And that the only people that are going to figure out where those frontiers lead are going to be these pioneering entrepreneurs and individuals, and that as the more they push their pioneering, trailblazing trailhead into the leading edge of the future, the more they're going to start opening up the problems inherent with that, right? The more complicated things get, the more unforeseen problems you have, and then in the face of this frontier of new problems opening up, the immediate reaction is obviously to regress, to retreat, right? I think we're in this moment where we are retreating from the frontiers of an overly complex world by basically rejecting the data, rejecting the accounting, rejecting the standards of morality and all this kind of stuff, and regressing back to whatever the most latent structure is, right? And this is why this is the kind of thing is that, like, at the problem I think with progressivism is that it's all the substructure. It's like you think about rings of a tree, right? It's like as we grow our civilization and our society, what you see on the outside is just like the bark at but if you were to cut down the tree, you would see all these rings that would form, and then when there's certain historical moments where there's certain weather things you'd be able to read them in the rings, right? All that kind of stuff. That there's some kind of thing that the core of where we are as a civilization has all these inner rings from these previous stages of historical development, and that when our the leading edge of our development becomes too complex or complicated, then we end up falling back on whatever the the sturdiest kind of inner ring is, right? And in this sense, there's a kind of a total, we're in a kind of decomposition moment, right? Where those old structures that are now kind of like, that were developed at a different point in time of history, this is what I'm trying to say, is like, does it make sense to approach the 21st century as if you were Napoleon Bonaparte, right? Maybe being Napoleon Bonaparte worked for that particular time in history, but if you're trying to be Napoleon Bonaparte today, you have to adapt to the complexities of today that are not the same as then. So we take these ghosts of our past and fling them at our present situation and fling them at our future, and then see how they decompose and break down, and then what kind of new thing emerges out of this, their inability to deal with the situation, right? And there's some potential for some creative development, for some new thing to come out of this, but it's obviously a bit of a mess. It's obviously, right now, it just looks like there's a lot of double standards, a lot of hypocrisy, a lot of there's a splitting between, you could either be very moralistic, very, a falling back on this sort of like the need for a moral center, or else really believing in nothing and living a completely amoral life, because this is also a problem with rationalism, is that if you're a rationalist, what defines morality is entirely up to you to rationalize that with your mind, right? It's not like you don't just fall back on some structure of a bunch of priests who've already worked this out, and you just have to pray, and they've done the work for you, and then you just fall in line with the mob mentality of everybody who believes in the same inherent moral structure that gives you the center. You don't talk about it. You live in this society where now everything's up for grabs, basically, because the new scientific era has basically made the old way of understanding what is good and what is moral obsolete. And so we have this opportunity where it's, if you want to live your life a certain way, then basically the only thing standing in your way is your inability to make yourself rich and powerful. Because if you can succeed as an individual, as an entrepreneur, as a wealthy person, you apparently, why should you be beholden, if you can lead the leading edge into the technological frontier of the future? Why should you be beholden to a morality that was developed 2,000 years ago, right? And this is basically, this tension is leading to the age of Aquarius, where there is a kind of this is coming up mostly around sexual politics, about our morality of what we deem to be right or wrong. Because what tends to happen is that it seems to be difficult for these people that are the rich and the powerful and the elites to transcend their basic human bodily cravings, and that if you're really in your head and detached from the old centers of morality, then you just have free license to do whatever you want, because like, what are you going to do? Have a debate about it, right? Like you see the culture that has emerged out of the debate bro, not really that great, right? This is why, part of the reason why I'm trying to stick with doing astrology videos and not become I have no interest in becoming some kind of a debate person, right? I don't know. This is basically what's on my mind for this full moon in Aquarius. Thanks for watching.